So when John at the beginning of the gospel says, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God, that had to have hit a Greek like a ton of bricks.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to Classical Etc. My name is Jessica Gardner. I'm your host today, and my role here at Memoria Press is to facilitate and serve the families at Memoria Academy, where we do online classes with the Memoria Press materials. And today, I'm here with Martin Cothran, Tanya Charlton, and Paul Schaeffer. Today, we're going to be discussing the mind of Martin and one of his recent articles.
What a fascinating subject.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
I am
out of here.
I didn't even propose that. She's came up with it. I like you, Jessica.
And specifically, his recent article in the winter edition of The Classical Teacher, where he gives us frameworks for approaching reason and faith. Are they rivals? Is there a tension? And what difference does it make? It's going to be a really good discussion. But before we get there, what do we always do? Talk about what we're reading. So, Tanya, do you want to start us?
Yes.
Okay.
I just finished my last holiday read, which was a British murder mystery by C.S. Harris. It's a series that I really liked.
Write that down.
Don't write that down because every murder mystery
you've ever read. You don't need to write it down. You know she's reading a murder mystery.
Jessica thinks that she should love murder mysteries, but she doesn't. So everyone she reads that's recommended she doesn't like. So I don't know why she continues.
I hated it.
She continues to try, though, which I don't. Louise Penny, one of my favorites, if not my favorite. Nope.
Okay.
Not for Jessica, but she keeps wanting. Like, I'm going to write that down.
Okay, I think I need to be recommending her the murder mysteries because yours are all very prim and proper.
Oh, goodness. You want to be recommending murder mysteries?
You want her to read James Lee Burke?
No, we are not. We're not going to let Martin say yay or nay on that.
We'll hear it from our listeners.
Anyway, I've picked up with Volume 2 of War and Peace, and I thought, it's been the whole Christmas holiday that I haven't read it. So, actually, it was before that. Mm-hmm. In between Volume 1 and Volume 2, I've read 2 British murder mysteries, David Copperfield and Demon Copperhead. So, it's been a couple months since I read War and Peace, but I picked it up, Volume 2, yesterday, because I've got to get back on it. And I just thought, this is just beautiful. I mean, I went right back into the story. There are a million characters, so I did have to do a little bit of homework to remember who was what family, but it really is beautifully written. And I know that's the translation.
No, I don't think
but
it's
a lot of it is. Yeah. It has to be. And I looked up these translators because we use them a lot. Mm-hmm. Pavir and his wife, whose name it's a Russian name. Well, it turns out he's American and she's Russian. And so it makes sense that it works. So their process I read was that she does the first translation and then he reads it and styles it in an American voice, and then they collaborate together, and then they both work side by side on the final. Like, it goes through like 3 or 4 different iterations before they're ever satisfied with it. And so that's why it's beautiful.
3 or 4 iterations of War and Peace takes like 30 years.
Seriously. I mean, that's a lot of work.
The whole question of translations, it's sort of like audiobooks. You know, a bad reader can ruin the book for you, and a good reader can make the book for you. The same thing, really, with translators.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I tell you, I feel like I had a bad reader when I read another Russian novel, Brothers Karamazov, and so I had some problems with it, but I think a lot of them were just the reader, and so I need to go back and read that book with a competent reader and a good translator.
Was?
Well, Constance Garnett. I think that it was the Constance Garnett translation. This is what I was coming to.
But you don't like Garnett.
I don't like Constance Garnett, and she was the one who did really. I think there were 2 older translations of Tolstoy anyway, and one was Constance Garnett. She also translated Dostoevsky, and but then Louise and Aylmer Maude,
Yes.
M-A-U-D
Yes.
or D-E.
I think
I can't remember, but Louise and Aylmer Maude, and they translated Tolstoy. And, I did what I did once when I was trying to find a Bible translation, many, many, many years ago. And I took like 5 different verses of the Bible and I put them all side by side.
and chose one.
And I chose one. But if I was to do that, and I did that with War and Peace, and the Maud translation is so much better. It's just
put it beside Pavir and see what you think.
And I have not read Pavir. I know that's the one that we sell, and I do. I need to read Pavir.
Yeah, I remember. I would imagine I was reading Garnett's or Maud's translation of War and Peace when I read it when I was like 18.
Probably so, because those were really the most common.
Right.
I always would have to go running to Martin when people would ask us about translations, because I knew he didn't like one or the other, but I never could remember which one.
Yeah, but I've when I picked up War and Peace a couple months ago, like Pavir's translation, I remember slogging through what I read before.
But you were also much younger.
I was also much younger, but Pavir's translation this time, I enjoyed it.
I immediately got right back into it, and I've also just finished Winnie the Pooh.
Which translation did you use for that?
A.A. Milne.
Okay.
I've been reading a lot of different things for work, but I won't bore you with them.
Paul, how about you?
I just finished The Escape Artist.
Who wrote that?
I shouldn't have paused because I was trying to remember.
That sounds familiar to me.
And I can't remember now who wrote it. But it's a really recent book, and it's about 2 Jews that escaped Auschwitz with the intent. One of them, Verber's his last name. Well, that's like the name he assumes after he gets out. And his real intent was to warn the world about what was happening, because he was a Slovak Jew. So he was like the first wave that got brought. And then he realized that all these Jews were willing to get on these trains because they thought they were getting resettled.
Right.
And so he wants to get out and warn the world. And I mean, there were some very tough parts of that book to listen to, because it describes in detail what he experienced.
Right.
But then what I found also very interesting was the last kind of half of the book is after he gets out, what happens and how there were people that knew he was telling the truth, but still did not want to publicize that information. And kind of his entire life through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, until he dies, he's he's fighting to get, everybody to realize how big of a deal this is.
How is it true? Is it a true story?
Oh yeah, it's a
like a
nonfiction. Is it
or
like
an autobiography? Did he write it?
No. This is somebody, because he was in a few documentaries, and it was interesting because the foreword tells how the author saw this guy in a documentary like in the 80s and realized he's like, this guy's story needs to be told in a way like Anne Frank's does and other people's. And so, but it took him about 20, 25 years before he went back around and then started interviewing the guy himself, his wife, his ex-wife, and it was just absolutely fascinating. I'd recommend it. It's hard to read. The first part particularly is hard to read, but we need to remind ourselves. But
so was The Hiding Place hard to read, but we need to do it. And the Holocaust Museum is so hard to visit, but we need to do it.
Yeah. And you, Martin?
You want to know what I'm reading?
I do.
Why didn't you ask me first? We would have needed to do them.
My goodness.
I'm reading The First Fast Draw.
A Western?
Absolutely.
He does,
of course,
love Westerns.
I'm sorry. I love to just every once in a while put myself in the hands of a great storyteller. And it's just, you can't put it down. And it's just a great little story of the guy who we think of Westerns as, they're all these one-on-one gunfights on the street where they draw the gun. And that actually was not the case until fairly late, well after the Civil War. And it's the story of the first guy who thought to do this
Oh,
it's kind of interesting. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I never thought of that. Well, no, they used, they had these big, awkward guns that they had to use, and on this, somebody thought, hey, put your gun in your belt or something, and then just draw it. And so it's about the guy who does that. And it's just a great story. L'Amour, he knows the geography.
Oh, it's Louis L'Amour.
Yeah, he knows the geography. He knows the names for everything. He knows the region. He knows the names of all the plants. I mean, it's.
But this is a fictional story. We don't know who thought to do that the first time.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Okay.
But it's somebody had to do it, so might as well be this guy that he writes about. So I'm very much enjoying that, as I always do. I almost always have a Louis L'Amour going on the side, just for pure.
And you
pleasure.
make fun of my British murder mysteries, and you're constantly over there with a secret drawer full of Louis
there's no
L'Amour.
parlors in these westerns, okay? And then I'm listening to The Peace to End All Peace by David. I wrote it down. David Fromkin is his name, and it's about how the Middle East got to where it is. And they go before the World War I, and what happened with the British Mandate and all that stuff, and why the countries are the way they are. It's great to know this while we're going through all of this stuff in the Middle East right now. How so that's very interesting. And then I took off. I had my 2-year-old grandson's birthday party this last weekend, and I don't have my drive from my house in Danville anymore. That's over an hour away, and I realized that that was my therapy. Is that long drive through the country that I used to make. So I haven't been able to do that. So I get out of the party, and I put my Google Maps on to avoid highways, and end up taking the old 44 across. It's somewhat parallel to the interstate, but it goes through. See, the Wild Turkey Distillery. Everyone talks about that here in Kentucky because bourbon's so big, and it's a striking thing. And this trestle over the river that goes right to the distillery, and an old stone bridge, and it's just like, this is amazing. So I'm listening to On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which there's one of those. The early hippies, basically, so there's things in there. Okay, but it was written in 1957, and it's He's going across the country, and it's America in the late 50s. And I'm on the road myself. I'm listening to this. I'm having a good old time, but it is so fascinating, and it reminded me a little bit of Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck, where he crosses the country and writes about it. And I think it's 1966, although listening to it, you would think it was even earlier than that. I didn't know America was still that way in the 60s. But I remember, it was my parents' generation, and what America was like back then. And it's a place that is now gone with the internet, with the advance of technology in all these areas. This was before that. It was before the fall, in a certain sense. There was a certain innocence there. In addition to, a lot of things were happening, and he's talking about what his friends are doing, but I just found it utterly fascinating to go back in a time machine using a book.
Tracy Lee Simmons wrote a review in the book that we just published by him about traveling across the country, but I don't think it was Steinbeck, was it?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I put you on the spot. You don't remember?
No.
It was, and I don't either.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, though, Harold Bloom, there was a book published posthumously that was like the 40 books you should reread. Have you seen that?
I don't know that I have that. I may have that book. Doesn't that
sound like a lot of fun to do with a book group?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
To just go through those 40 books and then his commentary on them and why you should read them several times.
Yeah, and Bloom's the guy to do it.
I just discovered it and thought, oh my gosh, this sounds wonderful.
Bloom's the guy to do it. He once said, I have read basically every important book that has been written.
Huh, he sounds like you.
Oh, well, he's one of those guys who
thinks he has.
Who's
making that determination?
He's one of those guys who is never uninteresting. He always has something interesting to say about what he's read, because I think he probably did read everything that was important.
That
in the
means he wasn't helping his
I
wife
was
at
just
all.
gonna say. I was just gonna say. What wasn't he doing?
He wasn't
when he
doing
was
the
reading?
dishes.
That's exactly right. Wouldn't we all love that life?
Oh, privilege.
What are
Yeah.
you reading, Jessica? Not a murder mystery, I hope.
I'm not. I have this eternal search. I'll find it. Over Christmas, I got 2 wonderful cookbooks. And I know that sounds like a cheat, but one of them I actually got from a colleague here at the press in a work Christmas book exchange. And I got the Escoffier. It's a French culinary textbook. Big.
Oh my gosh.
And it is so delightful. No pictures, so it's not a cookbook with pictures. And it's been just a joy to
Oh, my
read and,
goodness.
historically how they approached food. And some of it's so simple. Just fry Brussels sprouts in butter, put as much cream as possible. And that's it. It's just a million different ways to do.
So you
all
like
kinds of
to
things.
cook?
I do.
So I don't like to cook, but I really love the British Bake Off. I can't really figure out why.
Yeah.
Maybe because
a lot
it's
of that-
British. Everything about you, Tanya.
Yes.
I want British
I know,
stuff.
British.
She probably watches the
There's
Westminster
a lot
Dog
of their
Show.
desserts are in the Escoffier because it's so
Oh.
French.
Because they
Yeah.
do some French nights. Have you ever read MFK Fisher, The Gastronomical Me?
Oh, no.
That's what you should read.
Okay.
MFK Fisher, who
Yes,
wrote
she is-
Goodell's
she wrote a lot of
Paradox, or whatever was it?
I don't know. She wrote a lot of books, and they all have food in them. They're all
Really?
like, yes.
I thought it was a
Fiction,
he.
nonfiction?
She's really no, it's a woman. This you must be thinking of somebody else, or did I give the wrong name?
You may have
I'm
given.
going to Google it. Can I Google in here? am I allowed to Google in here,
She's
Kuiper?
Googling on the air.
We've
I'm
all
doing
done
there.
it.
We,
You don't
we
have
could
to-
also not cut it and just show that Tanya has to look stuff up.
Don't
Hey,
take it out.
Only because Martin thinks because Martin is
Is it fiction? Is it a story?
she's
or
an
is it-
American food
she?
journalist. It's a story.
Oh, that's a different person I'm thinking of.
She's written all
Okay,
these
I wrote it down.
books, and yeah, this is
MFK
definitely a woman.
Fisher.
Who are you
Okay.
thinking of, Martin? Can we Google a title?
Yes.
I'll have to Google
What
it, and
title-
I don't
what title-
do that on the
what
air.
title
What
are
was
you
the
thinking?
title?
The title of the book.
It's that big, thick book. It was popular when I was in college. and
Big,
it's
thick
Escher, Goodell,
War and
and
Peace.
Bach. It's called
What
There you
it,
go.
Escher?
Escher, Goodell,
ESCH.
ESCH, I think. Escher, ER, Goodell, GODEL, and Bach.
And Bach, an eternal golden braid. Douglas Hofstadter. Please do not cut this, Kuiper, because this is
Moving
priceless.
along.
MFK
This is
Fisher.
prime content. Prime content.
Honestly.
Oh. It's been a joy. And
Yeah, we get to dig deeper
now-
into Martin's mind.
what we're really here for is to just,
I'm here to be psychoanalyzed, apparently.
Well, we're going to
Oh.
psychoanalyze your article here.
Yes.
I had to look up palmary.
I did too.
I didn't know. I've never heard
I
that word
did
before.
too.
What?
You use the word palmary.
Palmary.
Mm-hmm.
I am not familiar.
Well, who wrote
This article.
Why don't we take it from the top?
Where is this? Where's this word?
It's right here.
In the second column.
Mhm. Yep, I got it too.
Oh, it's
there,
because
right
it's
there,
a quote.
Palmary faith.
That's why Martin used it.
Oh, it's
No.
a quote. I have no
Well,
idea
you
what
would
it
think
means.
you would know what the words were in the quote that you're using.
No, I have no idea.
Okay. Well,
Well, to orient
Okay.
ourselves.
So we should say what article it is, right?
Right. You wrote in the Classical Teacher an article entitled 3 Ways to Think About Athens and Jerusalem.
Okay.
And you gave us 3 historical viewpoints on how we've viewed these 2 cultures.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody just tell me what I wrote?
And one of the interesting things you said at the beginning was that this was a raging debate.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
Tell
yeah.
us, what was the debate? Where was the threat? What was the tension?
Well, okay.
and yes, I was wondering too, like, how long has this been raging?
Yeah.
This raging debate.
Raging, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what this is talking about is this relationship between 2 cultures that has been going on in the Western mind since the early centuries after Christ. Okay, because you had Greece. Greece had existed for several hundred years before this, And they developed this culture, which is at the heart of Western culture. It is basically the culture that has taken over, whether we know it or not. That's the air we breathe, right? And so then you have Jerusalem, the culture of Jerusalem, which is a spiritual culture, a religious culture. And from the early times, I mean, even when Alexander conquered the known world, I mean, he came through and conquered Israel. And Alexander has taken over all the known world, and then he dies, and his kingdom falls apart immediately because it's divided between his generals. And so at that time, and I don't know if it was I can't even remember actually if it was Ptolemy or one of these other generals who was I know Ptolemy was in Egypt. I don't know if he controlled the Middle Palestine geographically, and so so you get the Hellenic world out, Hellenism. Hellas is the Greek word for Greece. So you get that Hellenistic culture, that Greek culture, and so even the Jews are Hellenized really early, centuries before Christ, which is why when you get to New Testament times, they're reading out of a Greek Bible. They're reading the Septuagint translation, the Jews, more frequently than they're reading the Hebrew, the original Hebrew. So, and then of course the New Testament is written in Greek, in the Greek language. So there's all kinds of things that come from this, this culture of the Jews and this culture of the Greeks coming together. And this has been seen, what the thesis of my article is, this has been seen in 3 different ways. The first of them, Tertullian, he's an early church father, I know 2nd, 3rd century, I can't remember. And he's saying, this is pagan stuff. We need to be focusing on Christ, and we need to be focusing on Christianity, and we don't need to be mixing
Palmary faith.
Palmary faith.
Tanya, when you looked that up, what did that mean?
Praise, worthy.
Like worthy of praise?
What was the definition? I can't remember the specific, but that is what it was just really a simple definition that just meant worth a faith that's worthy, a faith that I can Google it.
Yeah. But anyway, while she's Googling, the first one of the first attempts at what do we think about this relation between Greece and the Hebrew culture and what is now the Christian culture is sort of a conflict that they're not compatible. This is what Tertullian is voicing. What hath Athens to do with Jerusalem? Right? And while that's going on, and in later decades, you get the Eastern Cappadocian fathers, because you have a separation this time. You got the Eastern Empire, and you've got the Western Empire in Rome. You've got two centers of learning, Constantinople and Rome, and there's a different way of thinking about things. So if you read the writings of Saint Basil, Gregory of Nazianzus, Gregory of Nyssa, it's a more Greek approach to a more Eastern approach to theology and the scriptures, whereas in Rome, Augustine is probably the most well known of the fathers there, but they're both dealing with this question, and they're both trying to figure out what is the relationship between Athens and Rome. And interestingly enough, and this is in Yaroslav Pelikan's book, Christianity and Classical Culture, which is a great study of this. He points out that they even came up with the same analogy, apparently, for all I can tell, independently of one another, which is that analogy of the Egyptian gold. They say
that's a really good analogy.
It is a good analogy.
And that was at the end of your article.
Yeah,
I thought that was fascinating.
And they both came up with it. The Cappadocian fathers and Augustine.
Do you think surely one of them got it from the other? You don't think so?
They didn't have mass means of communication, but they didn't have cell phones to look stuff up.
Yeah, right. They didn't have cell phones to look what each other was saying.
Augustine said, "Let me Google this and see what they're doing in the East."
So, in the analogy is basically that when the Jews were captive in Egypt, and Moses comes and there's the 10 plagues, and finally they've had enough of this. There's been 10 plagues on
we
Egypt.
know the story. Let's just move on to the analogy.
They don't know the story.
They totally know the story of Pharaoh and Moses.
Oh, they know.
Can
that
we
story.
just get to
I was
the Red
about
Sea?
to end it before
Okay.
you interrupted, so we've wasted a good 15 seconds because of your interruption. And so they're leaving, and as they're leaving, and it's something that a lot of people don't even notice in the account, is that they're showered with gold and jewels by the Egyptians. And it's not clear exactly why they're doing this. I guess because they think this God must be so great that he's just basically embarrassed all the Egyptian gods, or I don't know why that is.
Didn't God tell them to do
God
that?
tells the Jews to go ask their neighbors
They
for
took it.
their jewels.
Okay.
Like, it's sort of
they
like,
got
we're
it.
celebrating, can we borrow? And
Okay,
they
so
borrow,
we know
and
the
they
story.
walk
He
off.
does not.
But so they take that gold out into the wilderness, and they make a golden calf, which is not a good thing to do. And I think
Thanks for the clarification.
Moses force them afterwards to ingest a little bit of that.
He grinds it into dust. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so they do bad things with it, but it's also the gold that is used to fashion the articles of the tabernacle, the vessels of the tabernacle,
Which I had forgotten.
Yeah. So God apparently doesn't have any problem with this. He's asking them to use it for his own glory.
Even though it is Egyptian gold.
Even though it is Egyptian gold, it's something from a pagan.
So the analogy is that we should use rational thought, that the Greeks
That that the pagans had some things that they had discovered that are not bad because they discovered them. They're actually good. God ultimately created them. And just because a pagan used it is no reason
to reject
say it isn't good or to reject it.
I like that when you say it would seem that Tertullian would seem to condemn the disciplines of logic and rhetoric, but that would undercut his own position since he uses the devices of logic and rhetoric in his condemnation of Greek thought.
I'm always interested in hearing arguments against the value of argument. Right. And so the judgment, the more universal judgment of the church, East and West, is that we should use the good things even if they come from a pagan. The thing, not only just physical objects that Augustine's talking about, but Augustine's drawing that analogy. No, because he's making this express argument from against people who were saying this in Rome, and he's saying, because he's writing, he's writing why am I blanking on the book? He's writing against these. Not only he's writing against these people who are saying what Tertullian is saying. And he's making the argument that, no, this is, number one, this is not why Rome is falling, because the Christians took over. That was one of the arguments they were saying. But they were also arguing against pagan learning. And he's saying, no, using the Egyptian gold argument and other arguments, we should use this. This is good stuff. The pagans discovered some truths.
And I think we forget that the pagans were God created. And it's not their fault that they didn't have the revelation yet.
Well,
I hate to reject God's creation.
Well, if you're a creature created in the image of God, then there's going to be some things that come from you that are good, right?
that are God created, like our sense of rationale and our ability to use our brains, our intellect, all of those things. We're created in the image of God,
right? And the thing about Genesis, right, is that God, in creating us in his image, right, he gives all men reason, not just Christians.
Right.
Right. So it's not just, we Christians have the ability to think and we ought to use it that way. But no, like everybody has that option. And it's just, it particularly historically, the Greeks that really focused on that.
Mm-hmm. Common grace.
Mm-hmm. And then I talked about the kind of opposite theory, the reconciliation theory, which comes most famously from Matthew Arnold, who was one of the great Victorian thinkers at the end of the 19th century. And he's saying that the Hebrews really valued knowledge, and the Greeks valued knowledge, while the Hebrews were more concerned with doing. So the Greeks were intellectuals. The Hebrews valued holiness. and that there's nothing inconsistent between those two things. That's his argument. I think there's a certain truth to that, but I don't think it captures everything. And then finally, the dialectic theory, which comes from Joseph Strauss, who was one of the great, very influential thinker in politics and philosophy. And this is what I'm talking about here comes from Jeffrey Hart's book, Smiling Through the Cultural Catastrophe, where he's taking Strauss's position and re-articulating it. And that position is basically, look, these two things are different. And sometimes they do seem to conflict. They seem to be inconsistent. But what Strauss argues, and Jeffrey Hart argues in his book, is that that's okay. That that's the way reality actually is. It has things that are paradoxical. There are two truths that don't seem to come together, and yet they do. And so what Strauss and Hart say is that tension between those two positions, seemingly inconsistent positions, is the energy that has driven Western civilization to its achievements. That's what to me, that's the more sophisticated look at this, and seems to me more true, because there are certain things that you have a hard time reconciling, and yet they're both true.
But you could effectively boil down the reconciliation and the dialectic theories into one.
That's what I was thinking. They're not that different, are they? I mean, certainly Tertullian is on the opposite side, but these other two feel very...
I said in here that the dialectic theory kind of comes out of the reconciliation theory.
Or you said it's like a further development.
What Strauss and Hart are saying, it's not quite as easy as somebody like Matthew Arnold would say.
Sure, but they're both getting at the same point that both, just introduce our theme as reason and faith. They're both saying we need to hold those two things together and not elevate necessarily one over the other as the only way to know.
Right.
And we're going to have paradox. Even if you deny anything but faith, there are paradoxes there too.
Right, because Christian positions like the nature of Christ, 3 persons, one nature.
Right.
I mean, to a Greek...
I think you confused a couple of theological concepts in that statement.
Impossible.
Or the deity of Christ.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, good.
I put the Trinity and the deity of Christ.
Yeah, the deity of Christ was your example in the article, and it was great.
2 natures, one person.
Your article was great.
Yeah, right. But
what just happened there? Can't tell you.
Yeah, but just shut up. 2 natures, one person. I'm sorry, in the identity of Christ. And 3 persons in the one nature with God, the triune God.
And one God.
Right. So those things...
Nature? Okay, anyway, keep going.
3. Those things seem to violate the law of non-contradiction, because... but they don't really. But how exactly those two truths can come together is complicated.
Right. And that's why the pagans could never come to an idea of the Trinity that had to be revealed. Right. Because it's not something that reason can come to by itself.
Yeah. Right.
That the reason does falter in knowing everything.
Although it was by reason that the fathers used to come to those doctrines at the same time.
Yes, because there was revelation that they were then able to then say, what does this mean? And through having honed their ability to reason through the tools the pagans had developed, they were able to say, okay, well, then this is what this revelation has to mean for us.
Right.
I like your ending too. The lesson is clear. The same substance can be used for good or for bad purposes. The Greeks and Romans, which is back to your Egyptian gold. The Greeks and Romans often went astray, but the best of them were searching for truth, and they often found it. The tools they used to find it should not be despised because they can be misused. Very nice.
I like you didn't read the last part.
I love the last. Yeah.
Okay, read it, Jess.
Reason is not the enemy of faith, but rather its partner, whether to solve earthly problems or to recognize a heavenly truth.
Darn.
When
Goodness.
when I read this, what I wrote down was pride, right? Like the problem that I think Tertullian is trying
Pride. He's talking about pride.
Thank you. I think
Look it up on Google.
problem that Tertullian is trying to sort of shine a light on is that if we try to say that we can know everything through reason, then we're going to end up denying faith, right? And
because what need do we have for it?
That's right.
If we've got it all figured out.
Yeah, and so it's that was his fear, and because of his fear, he throws it all out, as opposed to saying this is a gift that has to be used very carefully. And I think that's just something that we have to, this tension you talk about, right? That's the tension we have to hold, is that if we rely solely on our reason, we're going to end up saying it doesn't make sense that Jesus can be both God and man at the same time, right? But that we can get pretty far with reason.
But the resurrection makes no sense at all.
Right. But then faith takes us beyond where we can get.
It's interesting also that the trajectory of thought leading up to the birth of Christ is more and more towards monotheism. I mean, when you read Plato, it's like this guy's a pre-Christian. He's not here, but he's on the trajectory.
Yeah.
And so reason is a handmaiden of truth, but it's not the determining factor, right? And so I think that what the church really has come to is that reason is valuable in itself, and it can take you a long way, but it can't get you ultimately to those the Trinity, the nature of Christ. Those
and it's an interesting tension, because my understanding of the trajectory of actually Islamic thought is, right, if you go back to the Middle Ages, you have Avicenna and Averroes who are doing actually a lot of philosophical thought with
very influential on Aquinas.
Aristotle, yes, very, very influential on Aquinas. So this is within the first 400 to 600 years of Islam, and then shortly after them comes Ibn al-Ghazali, and he writes The Folly of the Philosophers. And what he does is he makes a strong case that what Islam stands for is submission, and that includes submission of your rational faculties. And so you do not trying to make trying to make Islam accord with reason is folly. It is something that ought not to be attempted, and makes their whole trajectory of thought kind of veer off the Western path of these two things are held in tension.
So they would be more on Tertullian's side?
Yes.
Very
Muslims?
much so.
Yes.
Very much so.
I did not know that.
A position that is many times called fideism, faith only, no reason, faith as opposed to reason. And in my summer class, I'll be teaching again this summer at memoriacollege.org. The introduction to classical education, we read this heart reading and we talk about this. And one of the things I do bring up in that class is that fact that you did have these early Muslim philosophers who were engaged in this same project, this dialectical conciliation project. But as you pointed out, it crashed and burned. And so that today, Islam is a very fideistic religion, and it doesn't have. I'll say this with qualification. It doesn't really have. There aren't a bunch of Muslim philosophers out there, because it's faith only. Now, I ran in, interestingly enough, at a conference this last summer. I ran into a Islamic classical educator, and he contested with me on that. He said there actually still is a tradition, but it's not the controlling philosophy view of Islam.
Right. And that I think that's a very good clarification, is that there was a strong strand of Islam that was headed down sort of the reason faith route. And that just got smashed down to there is a strand, but instead of it being a significant strand of Islam,
It's not the mainstream.
It's a minimal strand.
Did he recognize that it's not the mainstream?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, but
that
he said he thought maybe I was overstating it a little bit to say it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah,
it does exist. It's just it's not Islamic orthodoxy.
But in the same ways, though, that there are pockets and strands of Christianity that are fideistic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a good point.
And so
that's right.
As much as like this view of the church is ancient, right?
Mm-hmm.
This view of seeing reason and faith going together is ancient. But even with that, right, we also have an ancient strand that rejects it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Tertullian strand. And so like we have to recognize that even within our own, faith community, right? You're gonna find people that say, actually, no, like I don't value learning logic and rhetoric because all I want to focus on is the Palmary faith.
Which does mean praiseworthy.
You found that on Google?
Yes. Well, I'd looked it up earlier, but then I started doubting myself because I thought that why not just say praiseworthy? But this was Tertullian speaking here, not you. Yes.
Oh, Palmer, he's the Palmer.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Didn't even remember.
Rather, the translator of Tertullian that used the word Palmary.
That's true. That's true.
Right.
So I noticed that we are all on this with this article with Memoria Academy full page ad on the other side. Was this on purpose?
Isn't that beautiful? Actually, Tanya, I believe it was
I'm
you
surrounded by
that chose
Memoria
this article.
Academy people here.
Yes, I believe you chose this article.
I did, but my picture's not on here.
Would you like us to add it?
Editorial.
With your alls.
Yeah.
Paul, I like where you took that, and I think it's a helpful springboard to ask maybe a silly question, but one that's in my mind, if you'll entertain it. So how does what we just talked about come to bear? What difference does it make today for us? It's fascinating to think about, and it really helps clarify things to ponder like the trajectory with Islam and how that comes to bear. That's fascinating. And even to think about how there are probably categories of faith that we can think about, or communities around us that are more faith alone or faith only. But how else do we see that, or what difference does it make to think about these things now?
Well, I think for us, as classical educators, I mean, people ask, why are you reading Homer and Virgil and all these Greeks? I mean, the Greeks weren't Christians. Why are they of any value? And if you come at it from a mentality of, these are the truths that these human beings made in the image of God were able to come to themselves. And to me, it's a fascinating story of how all the pointers are to the things that we now as Christians consider virtues, and how that was foreshadowed in all of these things that the Greeks in particular, because they were the most advanced of the pagans in this regard. That to me, that's a fascinating story. And if you're able to put that all together by seeing this whole panorama of events and ideas, and to me, I just find that fascinating.
I do too, and I find it comforting to think that all of this creation has all and continues to work together to point in one direction. Is for me, that's a comfort.
It strengthens your faith to know that.
Well, and I think the point Martin was making earlier about Alexander coming through and Hellenizing the Jewish people, like, God found it appropriate to prepare the minds of the people he was going to become incarnate in with the Greek philosophy, right? There's already this melding prior to the coming of Christ that really prepared the soil. And so why would we not? Because I mean, it's all through John's prologue, right? Like that is clearly a reference to Greek philosophy. And Mitchell and I were talking yesterday about some sections of Paul's writings, and where you're clearly seeing references to Platonic ideas of, the body and the soul and things like that. And so, if God prepared the people that way, then why would we not prepare our own kids that way?
When you say the prologue, are you talking about
John 1?
John 1 in the beginning is the word?
Well, yeah, I mean, when I run into people,
prologue.
Oh, well.
I just think
when
it's
I run
part
into
of John.
Christians,
Welcome to Paul's mind.
Both Pauls.
when I run into Christians who contest the use of reason, I mean, you do run into people like that, and it's always like, and we don't need to listen to the pagans on that. What language is it that the New Testament is written in? Greek. Okay, we're not supposed to like the Greeks, but the New Testament is written in Greek, and there's all kinds of things that go along with that. I mean, the fact, one of those things in terms of this story, this leading up to thing is, I think maybe the Greek language was invented for the New Testament to be written in. I mean, there's a certain sense in which I think that's true, and that it would have the terminology. For example, the word logos. This is a word that the pre-Socratic philosophers were using to talk about this principle behind everything, the operating principle of the universe.
And I mean, it's jam-packed with meaning.
Yeah. It's got this huge meaning. And so when John at the beginning of the gospel says, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God, that had to have hit a Greek like a ton of bricks. Right? Mm-hmm. That word, that's the word that the thing the Greeks were looking for behind everything all along. And that's the very word John uses to say who Christ is. Mm-hmm. That blows my mind. Yeah. And I think that was planned. I'm a conspiracy theorist. A metaphysical conspiracy theorist.
And it's beautiful to think about how what you just described, how they're all in service to the individual soul and also to the broader community historically and then for generations. That's really beautiful to think about. Did we miss anything?
Probably, but
probably we did.
We'll make a whole show out of what we didn't do here.
Oh, well, friends, thanks for joining us on this discussion today. We hope that it was enriching to your mind and to your faith. And if you haven't yet, you can subscribe to The Classical Teacher to get it in your mailbox for free. Just go to memoriapress.com. There's a catalog tab and you can put in your information and we will get it to you. So yeah, thanks for joining us and we'll be back soon.
Thank you for watching this episode of Classical Etc. Please consider liking or sharing this video or commenting below to let us know what you thought. This has been Classical Etc. with Memoria Press. We'll see you next time.